The sky above the capital planet of Varian's empire was not like any Earth sky. Dark clouds swirled with shades of deep violet and silver, and 2 moons reflected faint light on the marble streets below. The city sparkled with lights from flying vehicles and towering crystal buildings. Yet beneath the beauty, there was a chill, a feeling that fear and control ruled here more than freedom or happiness. Leora had never seen a place like this. She had traveled across space on a human freighter, carrying supplies and goods, and never expected to be brought here. The truth was, she had been bought at an imperial auction. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and her presence alone made her valuable. Yet Leora was not afraid. She had learned long ago that fear was a weapon others could use against her, but she could also use it against them. The palace was enormous. Towering walls of black crystal reflected the violet sky. Guards, tall and armored in silver and gold, stood silently as Leora was led through vast corridors. The air was cold, scented faintly with strange flowers that glowed in the dark. She noticed tapestries on the walls showing scenes of battles, victories, and kings whose faces were carved in cold authority. Finally, she was brought to a large chamber. At its center sat King Varian. His presence alone was enough to make most beings shiver. He wore a long robe of dark fabric, embroidered with threads of gold that shimmered like liquid sunlight. His eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, and they seemed to measure everything: her courage, her strength, her fears. "Human," he said in a voice that carried through the room like a low storm. "You have been bought for one night. Your role is simple. You will obey. You will entertain. And then, in the morning, you will be gone." Leora stepped forward, her chin high. "I am not afraid, Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was calm, firm. "And I do not plan to be." Varian raised an eyebrow. Few had ever dared speak to him this way. His mouth curved into a slight smile, but it was not warm. It was the smile of a predator curious about its prey. "Interesting," he said. "Most humans would be trembling by now." "Why do you resist?" "Because fear is not always power," Leora replied. She walked closer, keeping her eyes on his. "Power comes from wisdom, from courage, and from knowing when to act." For a moment, Varian said nothing. He studied her like a scholar examining a rare artifact. Then he laughed, a low, amused sound. "You are bold. You may be the first human to ever speak to me like this. Boldness is rare, but dangerous." The night began with formalities. Leora had expected food and entertainment, perhaps a stiff conversation. But Varian challenged her mind, asking questions not about trivial matters but about politics, ethics, and the nature of power itself. Every answer Leora gave showed intelligence, patience, and insight beyond what any human or alien might expect. He tried to unsettle her. Guards entered, testing her composure, whispering threats of punishment. Leora ignored them, speaking to the king as if the guards were not there. The subtle display of confidence made the king lean forward in his seat, curiosity sharpening his expression. Hours passed. The night deepened and the violet light outside dimmed. Varian spoke of the empire, of battles won, of cities conquered, of citizens ruled by fear. Leora listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but she did not submit. "You speak as if you understand more than you should," Varian said finally, "and yet somehow I find myself..." Intrigued, Leora tilted her head. "You rule through fear, Your Majesty. But fear only lasts as long as it is enforced. Once cracks appear, the walls fall. People follow strength, yes, but they follow wisdom even more. And I see many cracks in your empire." The king's eyes narrowed. Few dared point out his weaknesses, and even fewer did so without trembling. Leora's words were like a light in the darkness, a light showing what many had wanted to say but could not. He felt a strange sensation, one that humans often called curiosity. Yet for him, it was unusual, almost dangerous. "Do you wish to see me fail?" he asked, his voice low. "No," Leora replied. "I wish to see you succeed, but succeed in the right way. Not with fear, not with cruelty, with vision and justice." Varian leaned back in his chair. He had heard many pledges of loyalty, but never like this. He realized that this human, bought for one night, might be capable of seeing truth that his own council could not. The idea unsettled him, yet it drew him closer. He found himself listening more carefully, thinking more deeply, wondering, how could a human have so much understanding? The night moved forward. Leora noticed details others might miss. The exhaustion in the king's eyes, the tension among his advisors, the faint tremor in his hand as he reached for a crystal goblet. Each detail she stored carefully, knowing that knowledge was more powerful than any sword. At one point, the king rose from his throne. He walked slowly around the room, studying Leora. "You are brave," he said. "Perhaps too brave. Humans are fragile. You are fragile." Leora's smile was quiet but confident. "Perhaps," she said. "But even the fragile can break the strongest chains. And sometimes the fragile can change the world." Varian paused. Something in her words lingered, like a shadow he could not grasp. No human had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever suggested that he could be wrong without facing immediate punishment. And yet she was not just surviving. She was shaping him, influencing him with every word, every glance, every calm response. As midnight approached, the air in the chamber seemed to shift. The king's usual composure faltered, replaced by a tension he did not fully understand. Leora, sensing his attention, took a step closer. She did not bow. She did not plead. She simply met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Tonight," she said softly, "you will remember more than you should, not because of what I do, but because of what you see in yourself. Change is not weakness, Your Majesty. It is strength if one has the courage to accept it." Varian was silent. His mind raced. For the first time, he felt a crack in the armor of his authority. The thought unsettled him, and yet he could not turn away. Her words, her presence were more compelling than any threat, more powerful than any command. Hours later, Leora was escorted to a private quarters. She could hear the palace settling into a quiet hum, the guards shifting, the crystal walls cooling, the distant sounds of the city outside. She had survived the night, but she knew the game was just beginning. She had impressed the king, yes, but more importantly, she had changed him in ways he did not yet understand. Varian remained in his chamber, staring into the darkness. The fire in his mind burned, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and fascination. He had faced countless opponents, broken countless rebels, and controlled countless lives. Yet tonight, a single human had seen through him, challenged him, and left an impression he could not ignore. The night ended quietly, but the consequences were already in motion. Leora was no ordinary human. King Varian was no ordinary ruler, and their destinies, once separated by power and fear, were now intertwined in ways neither could have foreseen. As the first light of dawn crept over the palace towers, Leora rested, her mind alert and ready. She had survived one night in the court of the cruel king, but the Empire, the king himself and the galaxy beyond were about to witness a force they could not ignore. The night that was supposed to be hers and then gone had become a night that changed everything. Days passed since the night Leora had spent in King Varian's court, and already the palace felt different. The air seemed heavier with unspoken thoughts, the corridors quieter, as though the walls themselves were waiting. The courtiers and advisors noticed a change in their king. He was restless, walking through the halls at odd hours, his sharp eyes lingering longer on small details, as if he expected to find something, or someone. Varian could not stop thinking about her. Leora, the human who had been brought for one night, had done what no one else could. She had looked at him without fear and spoken truths he had long ignored. Every word echoed in his mind. Every calm gesture haunted him. And with each passing day, that initial fascination deepened into something more consuming. Meanwhile, Leora had adjusted to life in the palace. She moved carefully, never breaking rules but always observing. She had learned to read the guards, the advisors, even the king himself. She knew where the cracks lay, where decisions could be influenced and where power could shift, and she used her intelligence not to destroy but to guide. Humans were underestimated in this empire, but Leora's sharp mind and courage began to earn quiet respect. One morning, Varian summoned her to the council chamber. It was unusual for a human to enter this room, and whispers spread among the officials. Leora walked with calm confidence, her eyes meeting each advisor's with quiet determination. She did not bow low, but there was no arrogance either, only a presence that commanded attention without words. Varian studied her from his throne. "Human," he said, his voice controlled but carrying that faint edge of obsession. "You have opinions. You have ideas. Do you think you can influence me?" Leora smiled gently. "I do not seek to influence you, Your Majesty. I seek to help you see things clearly. Strength without wisdom is dangerous. Power without insight destroys itself. The king leaned back, folding his arms. And you think a human can teach a king? Perhaps, she said. Or perhaps I can remind you of what you already know but refuse to see. The council session began, and Leora listened carefully. When the king asked questions about trade, military strategy, or foreign policy, she responded with clarity and honesty. Each answer revealed insights that the advisors had missed or ignored. Gradually, the king began to act differently in the council. He asked new questions, considered perspectives he had long dismissed, and, unthinkable to the court, sometimes admitted he did not know the answer. Whispers began to circulate. The human is influencing the king. Some advisors were afraid. Some were curious. All were unsettled. Leora, however, moved quietly through these corridors of power. She did not command armies or seize positions. Instead, she planted seeds of wisdom and courage. And slowly, loyalty shifted from fear to respect, from obligation to admiration. Varian, meanwhile, was consumed by thoughts of her. He could not sleep, could not eat without thinking of her. Her presence had become a kind of gravity, pulling at his mind. He tried to remind himself she is only human. She is small. She is fragile. But every time he spoke to her, every time she answered with calm intelligence, the idea of control slipped further from his grasp. One evening, the king found her alone in the palace garden. Silver moonlight reflected off the crystal flowers, and the air was soft with a faint fragrance. Varian approached slowly, almost cautiously. "You move through this palace as if it belongs to you," he said, trying to sound commanding. Leora looked up at him, calm and serene. "Perhaps it does," she replied softly. "Not in ownership, but in understanding. I have learned to see what others miss, and that is why I walk freely." Varian stopped, taken aback. Her words struck him like a blade he could not parry. He realized that her influence over him was not through fear, charm, or obedience. It was through clarity, insight, and courage. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he was no longer the one controlling the situation. Days turned into weeks, and Leora's subtle guidance began to show results across the empire. Military operations that had been faltering now succeeded. Trade negotiations that had stalled now progressed. Citizens whispered of a king who seemed changed, and always behind the transformation was the human who had been bought for one night. Varian's obsession, however, began to worry even him. He found himself making impulsive decisions to see her, to hear her thoughts, to test her mind. He defied long-held customs, ignored council advice, and risked political alliances. And each time, Leora's calm presence reminded him why such risks were dangerous, but also showed him how they could be corrected with insight and intelligence. One day, a rival faction tried to seize control of a distant province. Varian's advisors argued for a brutal response, as had always been the custom. But Leora suggested a different approach, a combination of strategic planning, negotiation, and demonstration of strength that did not destroy lives unnecessarily. Varian followed her guidance hesitantly at first. The plan succeeded beyond expectations. The rival faction was subdued, not through fear alone, but through respect and careful strategy. The king realized that her ideas, her perspective, were not just clever, they were effective. And with each victory, his obsession deepened. But Leora had her own goals. She knew the king was powerful, but also flawed. His obsession could destroy him if left unchecked. And so she guided him carefully, teaching him the balance between strength and wisdom, power and responsibility. She did not manipulate. She inspired, and slowly she became a force he could not ignore, a human who could challenge and teach a king. The turning point came during a grand ceremony, where the empire celebrated its victories and the king's achievements. Leora was present, standing quietly among the crowd. She observed not the pomp and splendor, but the subtle interactions, the advisors whispering, the soldiers standing rigidly, the citizens watching with awe. She noticed where the king's arrogance might slip, where his decisions could falter, and where wisdom could prevail. When a sudden crisis erupted, a messenger arrived with news of a potential rebellion in a distant sector. Varian acted quickly. Normally, he would have reacted with anger and fear, issuing commands that crushed dissent but left long-term resentment. This time he paused. He consulted Leora quietly. Her calm advice, her insights into strategy and human nature, guided his decisions. The rebellion was quelled but not destroyed. The citizens were not broken. They were respected and loyalty followed. Varian stared at her after the crisis had passed. "You have changed everything," he said softly, almost to himself. "I do not know if this empire would survive without you." Leora looked up, meeting his gaze. "The empire could survive without me," she said. "But it will only thrive if its leaders, especially you, learn to see clearly, act wisely, and respect those they lead." For the first time, the king understood that his obsession had become something deeper than fascination. He was no longer only drawn to her intelligence and courage, he was changed by them. He had begun to see the empire not as a tool of power, but as a responsibility, and the human who had been bought for one night was at the center of that transformation. As the ceremony ended, Varian walked with her through the palace gardens once more. He no longer tried to command her. He listened, and for the first time he felt something unfamiliar: partnership. A ruler who had been cruel, feared, and untouchable now found himself inspired, guided, and challenged by a human who had entered his life for one night and had become his obsession, his teacher, and the force that might save him from ruin. The stars above reflected in the crystal paths around them, and Varian realized that everything he thought he knew about control, power, and fear had changed. Leora had not only survived her night in the palace, she had reshaped it, and in doing so she had shown the galaxy that humanity, though small and fragile, could wield influence far greater than anyone had imagined. The night ended quietly, but its impact would last for generations. Leora had turned a single moment into a lifetime of change, proving that courage, intelligence, and wisdom were forces no empire, no matter how vast or cruel, could ignore. And for King Varian, the night would never be forgotten.